What if an arrogant CEO, demanding a white server instead of a black waitress, at the most exclusive restaurant in the city, suddenly discovered the woman he dismissed owned not just this establishment but 17 others across the country? The cutting words meant to diminish her worth in front of his business associates froze in the air as she calmly placed her business card beside his untouched champagne flute, revealing a truth that would transform both their worlds before dessert was ever served. The crystal chandeliers of Le Jardin cast honeyed light across polished marble floors as Maya Washington glided between white-clothed tables with the practiced grace of someone who belonged among the elegant surroundings yet chose to serve within them. Her crisp black uniform contrasted with the soft cream walls adorned with original art pieces worth more than most homes, each step measured and deliberate as she approached the round corner table where Richard Bennett held court with his 4 business associates. The reservation book had flagged his name in gold, CEO of Waitress Industries, table requested 3 weeks in advance, previous visits noted for generous tipping and difficult demands. But nothing had prepared Maya for the immediate curl of his lip as she placed the hand-printed menus before each guest. The words that followed sliced through the gentle hum of conversation and classical string quartet music that typically blanketed the restaurant's main floor, his voice pitched precisely to Carrie. "Is there someone more appropriate who could handle our table tonight?" His eyes flicked dismissively over her dark skin, as though assessing a product found lacking, his fingers tapping impatiently against the tablecloth while his companions shifted in their plush chairs. 2 tables away, an elderly couple paused mid-conversation, wine glasses suspended halfway to lips, while across the room a group of regular patrons exchanged meaningful glances that spoke volumes in silence. Maya felt the weight of 23 pairs of eyes pressing against her back as servers, bartenders, and kitchen staff peering through the service window collectively held their breath, watching for her reaction with the tense anticipation of witnesses to an accident. Yet not a flicker of emotion crossed her face beyond the professional smile that remained firmly in place, steady as the foundations of the century-old building that housed Le Jardin. Her voice remained melodious and warm when she responded, "Of course, sir. I would be happy to find you another server if you prefer," though she knew precisely what he meant by appropriate from the 12 other similar encounters she had navigated during her 15 years in the restaurant industry. One of his associates, the woman in a navy business suit with kind eyes that seemed apologetic without speaking, glanced up with a look that conveyed embarrassment for her colleague, but said nothing to contradict him, as Maya tucked her notepad into her pocket with hands that refused to tremble, despite the familiar burn of humiliation seeping beneath her composed exterior like poison beneath still water. The restaurant had fallen into that particular hush that follows social violence, that collective intake of breath that precedes either resolution or escalation. And in that suspended moment, Maya stood perfectly straight, her 5'6" frame somehow filling more space than her physical dimensions should allow, dignity wrapped around her shoulders more regally than any designer garment worn by the wealthy patrons she served nightly in this temple to culinary luxury. Friends, before we go further, may I ask a small favor? Please subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us keep bringing you these stories, and reaching 1,000 subscribers soon is so important for us to continue. We also love hearing from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how our little storytelling circle is spreading across the world. And if you enjoyed the beginning, give this video a like, and let's share thoughts on the whole story together below. Richard leaned back in his chair with the casual entitlement of a man accustomed to bending the world to his preferences, his custom Italian suit, a silent announcement of status that he nonetheless felt compelled to reinforce verbally as Maya remained poised before their table. "I simply expect certain standards to be maintained in establishments of this caliber," he continued, voice dripping with false reasonableness while his eyes performed another dismissive assessment of Maya from her simple gold studs to her regulation black shoes. "One comes to Le Jardin for a particular experience after all." The crystal stemware clinked softly as Maya arranged 5 wine glasses with mechanical precision, each placement a small victory of self-control as memories from her childhood in South Chicago threatened to surface. The leaking apartment her grandmother had maintained with fierce pride, despite working 3 cleaning jobs. The second-hand textbooks Maya had covered with brown paper to hide their worn edges from classmates. The 67 rejection letters from culinary schools that had papered their refrigerator before the 68th brought acceptance and a partial scholarship. James, the associate seated to Richard's right with salt and pepper hair and a face creased by smile lines, attempted to diffuse the thickening tension with a gentle intervention. "The wine list here is supposedly exceptional," he offered toward Maya, with an apologetic smile that acknowledged the inappropriate behavior without directly confronting it. "Perhaps you could recommend something that would pair well with—" Richard sliced through the attempted olive branch with surgical precision, his hand cutting through the air as effectively as his words cut through James's attempt at human decency. "She can fetch whoever is responsible for the wine service, James. I doubt the help memorizes taste profiles between bussing tables." Maya felt the words land like physical blows against her professional armor, yet her hands remained steady as she finished arranging their settings, each movement a silent testament to the self-discipline forged through years of financial struggle and professional kitchens where she had endured far worse to earn her place. Behind her practiced smile, a mental calculation ran through her head. The $400,000 in student loans she had repaid 3 years early, the initial investment capital she had scraped together from 87 catering jobs while sleeping on a friend's couch, the 12 bank rejections before finding financing for her first small bistro, the endless nights perfecting recipes while rivals with half her talent. But the right connections advanced past her. She thought of her grandmother who had taught her that dignity could never be taken, only surrendered, and whose framed photograph sat on Maya's desk in the office 2 floors above where they now stood. "I would be happy to have our sommelier assist you," Maya replied, voice melodious and unruffled as a still lake despite the hurricane of indignation swirling beneath her professional veneer. "Dominic has been with us for 8 years and trained in France." She stepped back from the table with the perfect balance of deference and confidence that had become second nature long before she could afford the 3-bedroom condo overlooking the lake or the silent partnership in 4 other restaurants across the city that none of her current tormentors could possibly suspect. The kitchen doors swung silently on well-oiled hinges as Maya entered the bustling heart of Le Jardin, where copper pots gleamed under precision lighting and 12-line cooks moved in choreographed efficiency between stations. Antoine Beaumont, executive chef and culinary genius whose 3 Michelin stars had followed him from Paris to Chicago, glanced up from the immaculate plate he was finishing with tweezers and microscopic edible flowers, his eyes narrowing as he caught the almost imperceptible tightness around her mouth. "Table 6, he stated, rather than asked, his French accent still thick, despite 15 years in America. Javier, the senior server who had worked alongside Maya since her first struggling bistro 7 years ago, stepped forward with a protective furrow between his brows. "Let me take over for Bennett and his sharks, Maya. Everyone in the industry knows he made that fortune cover by stepping on necks and taking credit for his team's innovations." The irony that none of them recognized the same Richard Bennett who had once refused to meet with her about investing in her restaurant concept hung unspoken in the air, laced with saffron and truffle oil. The owner of 17 restaurants, including the most exclusive reservation in Chicago, shouldn't have to serve wine to a man who would never recognize her as an equal, added Sophia. The pastry chef, whose artisanal chocolate sculptures had their own Instagram following with 300,000 devoted fans. Maya allowed a genuine smile to replace her professional mask for just 5 seconds before straightening her shoulders beneath the simple black uniform she wore once each month at all her establishments. a practice that had been featured in Entrepreneur magazine last spring as revolutionary management technique, though for her, it was simply remembering her roots. The day I'm too important to serve my own customers is the day I've forgotten everything that matters about hospitality, she replied, the words familiar to her staff, who had heard her philosophy countless times during pre-service meetings. Antoine made a sound between a snort and a laugh as he returned to his plating, the same dismissive noise he had made 14 years earlier, when Maya had presented her final project in his Advanced Culinary Techniques course. Before informing her, she lacked the innate talent necessary for true culinary greatness. The memory still stung despite the sweet satisfaction of now signing his considerable paychecks after recruiting him from his failing Parisian restaurant 3 years ago, when critics had declared his classical approach passé, outdated. Besides, she continued, accepting the perfectly arranged appetizer plates that would soon grace table 6. Once a month serving shifts, keep me honest about what works and what needs improvement. Dominic approached with the wine list, his silver sommelier cup hanging from his neck like a medallion of office. I understand table 6 needs attention from someone more appropriate than the woman who literally wrote the book on modern American fusion cuisine, he commented with the precise amount of protective outrage balanced against professional restraint, referencing her cookbook that had spent 37 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, though none of her current tormentors would connect author M. Washington with the server they were currently dismissing. Maya balanced the appetizer plates along her arm with practiced skill that had never fully abandoned her muscles despite years of managing balance sheets rather than dinner service, the familiar weight centering her as she prepared to return to the dining room, where Richard Bennett continued his performance of importance, entirely unaware that the woman he had deemed unworthy of serving his table actually owned the very chair in which he Saturday. The appetizers arrived at table 6 with perfect timing as Richard Bennett reached the crescendo of his complaint about the wine list, his voice deliberately pitched to carry to nearby tables, as though his dissatisfaction deserved an audience beyond his immediate companions. Maya approached with 5 artfully arranged plates of seared scallops nestled on beds of microgreens and truffle foam, each garnished with edible gold leaf that caught the light as she placed them before each guest with fluid precision. The selection here is tragically predictable, Richard announced as Dominic presented the leather-bound wine list with a slight bow, nothing you wouldn't find in any corporate steakhouse in the financial district. His associates nodded with the automatic agreement of subordinates, while Maya arranged the last plate before Vanessa Chen, the only woman in the group whose sharp eyes and Yale law degree made her the youngest partner at her firm according to the reservation notes Maya had reviewed earlier. Richard pointed dismissively toward a bottle on the 3rd page without bothering to look at Maya. The Cabernet Sauvignon, 2018. Maya noted the selection with a neutral expression that masked her knowledge that the particular vintage had scored only 87 points with Wine Spectator and clashed horribly with the delicate flavors Antoine had crafted for their appetizer. If I may, she ventured with appropriate deference, the 2016 Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley would complement the scallops beautifully with its notes of cherry and subtle earthiness that would enhance rather than overwhelm the truffle elements. Richard snorted, with undisguised derision as his gaze swept past her to focus on his companions. How charming! They train the servers to recite wine facts now like parrots repeating phrases without understanding. His companions offered obligatory chuckles except for Vanessa, whose manicured finger tapped thoughtfully against the stem of her water glass. Actually, Vanessa interjected with quiet authority that silenced the men at the table through sheer unexpectedness. I would love to hear more about the Pinot Noir recommendation. My father collects Willamette Valley wines, and I've developed quite an appreciation for Oregon vintners. The interruption created a microscopic fissure in the power dynamic at the table as all eyes turned toward Vanessa, then back to Maya, whose posture remained impeccable as she smiled with genuine appreciation at the opportunity to share actual knowledge rather than rehearsed phrases. The 2016 had perfect growing conditions with early spring rains followed by a dry summer that concentrated the flavors without stressing the vines, Maya explained, her words flowing from genuine passion rather than memorization. The winemaker uses minimal intervention techniques, allowing the terroir to express itself fully through notes of black cherry, forest floor, and a hint of baking spice on the finish. Vanessa nodded with genuine interest, while Richard shifted impatiently in his chair, clearly irritated at losing control of the conversation to a server he had deemed beneath notice, and a colleague who had broken ranks. "We'll stick with my selection," he declared flatly, cutting off further discussion with the finality of someone unaccustomed to contradiction. "The cabinet meeting begins in 30 minutes, he added pointedly to Vanessa, a clear reminder of their professional relationship and his superior position within it. Maya inclined her head in acknowledgement before stepping back from the table, noting how James and the two other associates now looked at her with slightly altered expressions, not quite respect but an awareness that had been absent minutes before, creating invisible lines of tension that radiated across the pristine white tablecloth like cracks forming in a frozen lake. 3 tables away, partially obscured by an arrangement of exotic orchids, Jonathan Pierce sipped sparkling water and observed the interaction with the focused attention of a man who had built his career on noticing details others missed. His reputation as the most feared restaurant critic in the country had been earned through 26 years of ruthless honesty about overpriced mediocrity and genuine celebration of culinary excellence regardless of its pedigree or price point. The New York Times had once described his reviews as surgical strikes that separate pretenders from artists with merciless precision. Yet few in the industry knew he was currently working on his most ambitious project to date, a profile of Maya Washington as a transformative force in American dining. Jonathan watched as Maya absorbed Richard Bennett's dismissive behavior with the unruffled composure he had observed in her during their 3 previous encounters, though she remained unaware that the man eating alone at table 9 was the same critic who had written the review that launched her first restaurant into national prominence 8 years ago. His fingers moved discreetly across his phone screen beneath the table, recording observations without looking down. Washington continues service with dignity, despite blatant prejudice from tech CEO, maintains perfect professionalism where others would justifiably falter. The remarkable duality of server, divided by empire builder on full display. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of her unique approach to hospitality. The critic noted the subtle shift in dynamics when the female associate engaged with Maya directly, cataloguing the micro-expressions that flickered across Richard's face, annoyance, territorial reassertion, and beneath it all, the insecurity that Jonathan had observed in countless powerful men who sensed their authority being questioned. He had interviewed 14 former employees of Maya's restaurant group during his 6 months researching her rise from South Chicago to culinary prominence, each conversation revealing consistent patterns of leadership that contradicted industry norms, her monthly shifts in uniform alongside hourly workers, profit-sharing programs that created unheard-of staff retention rates, culinary mentorship initiatives for underprivileged youth that had launched 37 successful careers. His editor had initially questioned the value of profiling a restaurateur without formal culinary training until Jonathan had outlined the math. 17 thriving establishments in a sector where 60% of new ventures failed. Within 12 months, a corporate structure that had turned 93% of her original staff into shareholders, and a foundation that had provided full culinary scholarships to 128 students from disadvantaged backgrounds. The transformation he was witnessing now, the quiet power beneath Maya's serene professional mask versus the increasingly obvious insecurity beneath Richard Bennett's bluster, crystallized the thesis of his nearly completed article about authentic versus performative authority in modern business culture. Jonathan made another note as Maya returned to the kitchen, capturing the nearly imperceptible straightening of her spine that suggested resolve rather than defeat. Washington navigates racial and gender boundaries with transcendent grace, while building an empire that outperforms competitors run by men with half her talent and twice her funding. He sipped his water thoughtfully, attention still fixed on table 6, where Richard Bennett continued holding court, entirely unaware that his behavior was being documented by the most influential critic in the industry for an article that would be read by millions, or that the server he had dismissed was the subject of that profile and owner of the very establishment he was attempting to critique with his limited palate and expansive ego. The main course arrived with theatrical precision, 5 plates of miso-glazed sea bass with truffle risotto and seasonal vegetables arranged like edible artwork. Yet Richard barely glanced at the culinary masterpiece before him as he drained his 3rd glass of the Cabernet he had insisted upon ordering against recommendation. The alcohol had loosened his already tenuous filter, his voice growing louder with each passing minute while his face flushed beneath the subtle lighting designed to flatter every guest regardless of age or complexion. Maya approached with the practiced timing of someone who could read a table's energy from across the room, arriving at the precise moment when water glasses needed refilling and before any guest might feel neglected. "Is everything to your satisfaction this evening?" she inquired with genuine warmth that extended to each person at the table, rather than focusing solely on Richard despite his self-appointed role as group spokesperson. Richard pushed his barely touched sea bass to the center of the table with the dramatic flourish of a prosecutor presenting evidence, the gesture drawing attention from nearby diners who glanced over with curious expressions before politely returning to their own conversations. "The fish is overcooked, and the risotto lacks depth," he proclaimed with the authoritative tone of someone who considered his opinion objective fact rather than subjective assessment, though the plates of his companions were nearly empty with obvious enjoyment. "I want to speak to the owner about the mediocre quality this establishment is trying to pass off as fine dining." Maya absorbed the criticism without defensiveness, knowing Antoine would be apoplectic at the suggestion his meticulously prepared signature dish was anything less than perfection, yet her expression revealed nothing beyond professional concern. "I understand, sir. I will see if the owner is available to address your concerns personally." As she turned to leave, Richard's voice followed her with the precision of a heat-seeking missile designed to maximize impact. "Make sure they understand who they're dealing with. I dine with restaurant investors weekly, and one word from me could impact their reservation book for months." The threat hung in the air like cigar smoke, poisoning the atmosphere around their table as Maya moved with unhurried grace toward the kitchen, her posture revealing none of the calculations rapidly firing through her mind. James winced visibly at his boss's behavior, while Vanessa studied her water glass with sudden fascination, both clearly uncomfortable with the escalation yet unwilling to challenge it directly. "Marcus Chapman and I play golf every Thursday," Richard continued, naming a well-known restaurant financier with deliberate volume that ensured Maya would hear him even as she walked away. "One text from me about subpar experience, and funding for expansion disappears faster than competent service in this place." His companions offered weak smiles that failed to reach their eyes, trapped in the uncomfortable position of witnesses to behavior they neither condoned nor had the courage to contradict. Behind the precise fold of her napkin and beneath the elegant table, Vanessa's finger moved across her phone screen, sending a message without looking down, a discreet search for Maya Washington that would soon connect the dignified server with the restaurant empire that had been profiled in last month's issue of Business Insider. Information that would shatter Richard's performance of superiority with the devastating precision of a diamond cutting glass. Through the kitchen's swinging doors, Maya maintained her composure, though her mind catalogued every word and gesture from Richard Bennett that would soon transform this ordinary dinner service into a moment neither he nor his associates would ever forget. the weight of her business card sitting in her pocket like a grenade with its pin half pulled, waiting for the precise moment of maximum impact. The hidden elevator whisked Maya from the kitchen to the third floor where her private office occupied the corner overlooking the Chicago skyline. The space, a perfect balance of functionality and understated luxury with its floor-to-ceiling windows and custom walnut desk that had been her first significant purchase after the restaurant group became profitable. She slipped out of the server uniform with practiced efficiency, each movement precise despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins, the familiar ritual grounding her just as her grandmother had taught her during childhood panic attacks when bill collectors would pound on their apartment door. The hidden closet revealed her armor, an impeccably tailored Armani suit in deep aubergine that had been featured in last month's Vogue profile of women transforming the hospitality industry. Though the journalist had failed to mention, Maya still worked service shifts alongside employees earning minimum wage plus tips. Her fingers moved across the tablet screen with practiced precision, pulling up the comprehensive profile her assistant had prepared on every VIP reservation, a standard protocol that had saved her from countless uncomfortable encounters and enabled personalized service that built her reputation for seemingly magical anticipation of guest preferences. Richard Bennett's corporate history unfurled before her eyes like a roadmap of privilege and casual cruelty. 3 discrimination complaints settled out of court in the past 18 months, a pattern of female executives departing after brief tenures, and most tellingly, a reputation among industry insiders for taking credit for innovations developed by his predominantly female research team. Her eyes drifted to the silver-framed photograph occupying prime real estate on her otherwise minimalist desk. 19-year-old Maya standing beside her grandmother in their tiny South Chicago apartment, the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling visible in the background. Her acceptance letter to culinary school clutched between them like a winning lottery ticket that had arrived after 67 rejections from other programs. Eleanor Washington beamed with fierce pride in the photo despite the oxygen tubes in her nose and the gaunt evidence of the cancer that would claim her life 6 months later. Her weathered hands that had cleaned hotel rooms for 37 years resting on Maya's shoulders with the gentle weight of sacrifice and unwavering belief. Never let them make you doubt what you know about yourself, her grandmother had whispered the night before she passed. Words Maya had carried through every kitchen that had tried to minimize her, every bank that had denied her loans, every competitor who had dismissed her vision for restaurants that treated both guests and staff with equal dignity. The pearl earrings she fastened now had been her grandmother's only valuable possession, worn on the day she had naturalized as a citizen after emigrating from Jamaica with nothing but determination and faith in American possibility. Maya stood before the full-length mirror, no longer the server Richard Bennett had dismissed, but the CEO of a restaurant empire valued at $78 million, with over 600 employees across 3 states and features in every major business publication in the country. Her reflection showed a woman transformed not by the designer suit or subtle makeup, but by the quiet confidence that radiated from within after years of proving her worth in an industry that had initially offered her nothing but resistance and dismissal. The tablet chimed softly with a text from Vanessa Chen. "Just Googled you." He has no idea, does he? Confirmation that at least one person at the table had connected the dots between server Maya and CEO Washington, adding another layer to the dramatic revelation that would soon unfold downstairs where Richard Bennett continued his performance of importance, blissfully unaware of the reckoning, heading his way with the quiet determination that had built 17 successful restaurants from nothing but grit and vision and the lessons of a grandmother who had taught her that true power never needed to announce itself with cruelty. The dining room hushed instinctively as Maya emerged from the private elevator that few guests even noticed existed behind its seamless integration into the textured wall. Her transformation from server to executive so completed, momentarily disoriented. Even staff members, who had witnessed this monthly ritual dozens of times before. The subtle lighting that had been programmed to adjust throughout the evening seemed to find her naturally, catching the rich aubergine fabric of her suit and illuminating the single strand of pearls at her throat, not with the harsh spotlight of theatricality, but with the natural gravitational pull that authentic power exerts on its plating gravitational pull. Surroundings. Conversations throughout the restaurant dimmed to murmurs, then respectful silence. As Maya moved through the space she had designed down to the last detail, from the precise height of each table to maximize comfortable conversation to the custom-blended fragrance diffused through hidden vents that complemented, rather than competed with the aromas of Antoine's culinary creations. Regular patrons who recognized her inclined their heads with subtle acknowledgement, while newcomers straightened imperceptibly in their chairs, responding to her presence without fully understanding why. The animal instinct that recognizes authentic authority versus its hollow impersonation. Maya navigated between tables with the same grace she had shown while carrying trays moments earlier, though now each step carried the weight of someone accustomed to commanding attention in boardrooms rather than requesting it during dinner service, her 5'6" frame somehow occupying more space through sheer gravitational presence rather than physical dimension. Richard Bennett remained oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, his back to her approach as he continued holding forth about his recent acquisition of a tech startup and the subsequent layoffs he had orchestrated to streamline operational redundancies. Corporate language for the tech startup. Destruction of 37 families' financial security. While James nodded with decreasing enthusiasm, and Vanessa watched Maya's approach with the riveted attention of someone witnessing an impending collision between opposing natural forces. The restaurant itself seemed to participate in the unfolding drama, the acoustics Maya had meticulously designed now carrying her footsteps just enough to register subconsciously without theatrical announcement. The Italian marble floor, solid beneath her Stuart Weitzman heels that had replaced the sensible black shoes required for service staff. Fellow diners who had witnessed Richard's earlier behavior now sat straighter in their chairs, sensing the imminent recalibration of a social order temporarily distorted by his performance of importance, the collective anticipation creating an almost electric current that ran beneath the sophisticated ambience of fine dining. 3 tables away, Jonathan Pierce set down his fork with deliberate care, recognizing the pivotal moment in his profile piece unfolding before him with the perfect narrative timing that writers might labor for days to construct, yet reality, occasionally delivered with effortless precision. Maya's transformation embodied the duality that had fascinated him throughout his research. The server who owned the restaurant, the South Chicago girl who now commanded a culinary empire, the woman who moved seamlessly between worlds most people occupied permanently without possibility of transcendence. As she approached the final steps to Richard's table, Maya felt her grandmother's presence in the pearl earrings against her skin and the straight spine that refused to bend to intimidation. Her journey from their water-stained apartment to this moment crystallizing into perfect clarity with each step that brought her closer to the man who had dismissed her, based on nothing but the color of her skin and the uniform she had chosen to wear despite having long ago earned the right never to serve anyone again. The precise moment when Maya Washington arrived at table 6 created the kind of perfect silence that expensive restaurants spend fortunes attempting to engineer through acoustic design, yet rarely achieve. Not the awkward silence of social discomfort, but the weighted pause of collective realization, as though the air itself had momentarily forgotten to move. You wish to speak with the owner about the quality of your experience. Her voice carried the same melodious tone she had used earlier while serving their appetizers, yet stripped of its deliberately deferential notes and infused instead with the quiet authority that had negotiated 8-figure deals across gleaming boardroom tables. Richard Bennett turned with the irritated expression of someone prepared to continue his performance of importance for a new audience, the rehearsed complaints about overcooked fish and inadequate service poised on his lips, until his brain processed the transformation before him, and confusion temporarily short-circuited his practiced arrogance. Maya placed her business card beside his barely touched dessert with surgical precision, the heavy cream cardstock with embossed gold lettering positioned at a perfect 45-degree angle to his plate, where the overhead lighting caught the raised text with unavoidable clarity. Maya Washington, founder and CEO, Washington Culinary Group. Richard blinked twice as the implications registered across his features in waves. Confusion giving way to disbelief, followed by the slow, dawning horror of recognition that sent blood draining from his face with such rapidity that his normally florid complexion turned ashen beneath the restaurant's flattering lighting. "You may know our other establishments," Maya continued with professional warmth that acknowledged his humanity despite his failure to extend the same courtesy earlier. The Washington Restaurant Group currently operates 17 restaurants across the United States, France, and Japan, including Le Petit Jardin in Paris, which received its 3rd Michelin star last month. The statement landed at the table with the quiet devastation of a precision missile rather than a boastful bomb, each word measured and factual without needless embellishment. Vanessa Chen inhaled sharply, recognition instantly registering as she connected the name on the business card with the Wall Street Journal profile she had read just last week about female executives revolutionizing the hospitality industry. Maya Washington. She breathed with undisguised admiration that completed Richard's humiliation more effectively than direct confrontation ever could. "Your restaurant group posted 30% growth last quarter while implementing that revolutionary staff profit-sharing program." James stared open-mouthed between Maya and Richard as his brain visibly recalibrated. Every interaction he had witnessed over the previous 90 minutes, mental gears grinding to process how his CEO had unknowingly insulted one of the most successful restaurateurs in the country and demanded a different server when the woman he had dismissed owned not just this establishment but an entire culinary empire spanning 3 continents. The 2 other associates exchanged glances, loaded with the horrified recognition that their company had spent 6 months attempting to secure a partnership meeting with the Washington Restaurant Group for their hotel chain expansion, a potential 8-figure deal that Richard had potentially torpedoed through a single evening of casual bigotry and performative superiority. Richard himself seemed temporarily incapable of speech, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound as he struggled to reconcile the server he had dismissed with the CEO now standing before him in an Armani suit that cost more than his monthly car payment, his brain frantically searching for a graceful exit from a situation entirely of his own creation, while finding all escape routes firmly closed by the business card, still gleaming beside his plate like irrefutable evidence in a courtroom of his own prejudice and profound misjudgment. Richard Bennett recovered his composure with the practiced agility of someone accustomed to extracting himself from uncomfortable situations, his expression shifting from shock to a manufactured casualness that fooled no one at the table, yet provided thin cover for his wounded pride. "Miss Washington," he began, voice modulated to project reasonable clarification rather than desperate backpedaling, "there appears to be a misunderstanding about my earlier comments." His hands spread in a gesture of false openness while his eyes darted between his associates, searching for allies and finding none. "My concerns were purely about service efficiency during our time-sensitive business dinner, not directed at you personally." The lie hung in the air like spoiled perfume as Maya stood perfectly still, allowing the silence to expand uncomfortably until Richard shifted in his chair beneath the weight of unspoken judgment. "Interesting," she finally replied, her tone conversational, yet precise as a surgeon's blade, "because I believe your exact words were that you wanted someone more appropriate to serve your table while deliberately looking at my skin." The clinical accuracy of her recitation caused James to wince visibly while Vanessa closed her eyes briefly in second-hand embarrassment, both physically recoiling from the words, as though they carried contagious shame. You later suggested I belonged in the kitchen rather than serving distinguished guests such as yourself, and questioned whether I could possibly understand wine beyond memorized phrases. Each quoted statement landed with quiet devastation, stripped of emotion yet devastating in their factual accuracy. Jonathan Pierce observed from his strategic position 3 tables away, his fingers moving rapidly across his phone screen as he captured the interaction with journalistic precision, the confrontation providing the perfect narrative climax for his profile piece. The restaurant owner who experienced firsthand the prejudice her employees faced daily. Choosing revelation over retaliation, Maya adjusted her stance slightly, the subtle movement communicating absolute ownership of both the physical space and moral high ground without theatrical declaration. I work service shifts in each of my restaurants monthly, she explained to the table at large rather than addressing Richard directly, effectively diminishing his centrality to the conversation. It began from necessity when I opened my first establishment and could only afford 3 employees, but evolved into a core management philosophy even after expansion. The simple statement revealed the authentic foundation beneath her success more powerfully than any corporate mission statement or press release ever could. I find it keeps me connected to both my customers and staff, reminds me of the practical implications of executive decisions made in boardrooms, and most importantly, prevents me from forgetting what it feels like to be treated as invisible or less than by someone who knows nothing about you except what they believe they see. The pointed observation contained no direct accusation yet landed, with pinpoint accuracy, causing Richard to swallow uncomfortably while the remaining color drained from his face. Vanessa nodded with undisguised admiration, while James studied Maya with newfound respect, the simple dignity of her explanation, highlighting through contrast the hollowness of Richard's authority, built on position rather than character. The restaurant had fallen completely silent as other diners sensed the significance of the unfolding drama. The collective attention focused on the elegant woman in the aubergine suit standing before the table of business executives, her composed demeanor revealing the profound truth that genuine power requires neither cruelty nor arrogance to command respect. James cleared his throat with the awkward determination of someone stepping into a conversational void that threatened to swallow careers whole, his normally confident boardroom demeanor humbled by the extraordinary circumstances unfolding before him. Miss Washington, I cannot adequately express my profound apologies for this evening's interaction, he began, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable as he physically shifted his chair to create distance between himself and Richard. A subtle but unmistakable repudiation. Our company, Pinnacle Hospitality Group, has actually been attempting to schedule a meeting with your team for nearly 7 months regarding a potential partnership opportunity. The revelation landed on Richard like physical weight, his shoulders visibly sagging as the professional consequences of his behavior crystallized with devastating clarity. His eyes widened with the horrified recognition that the server he had dismissed now represented the business deal his board had designated as the cornerstone of their annual growth strategy, the realization transforming his face into a mask of barely concealed panic. Vanessa reached smoothly into her leather portfolio, producing an embossed presentation folder with the Washington Culinary Group logo prominently displayed on its cover. We brought our preliminary proposal documents to dinner tonight on the infinitesimal chance we might encounter someone from your executive team during our stay in Chicago, she explained, her tone reflecting professional eagerness, tempered with genuine respect rather than the desperate damage control radiating from Richard. Your boutique culinary approach represents exactly the direction our hotel group hopes to move toward in our dining offerings across all 34 properties. Maya received the folder with gracious acknowledgement, her movements unhurried despite the seismic shift occurring at the table, as power realigned itself before the stunned eyes of everyone present. Richard watched the folder exchange hands with the helpless expression of a man witnessing his own professional execution, understanding with brutal clarity that his casual prejudice had potentially sabotaged a partnership valued at approximately $47 million, according to the financial projections his team had presented just yesterday during their strategy meeting. The board's specific instructions echoed in his memory with merciless precision. Secure the Washington Culinary Group partnership at any cost. Their innovation is exactly what we need to differentiate our properties in an oversaturated market. His mouth opened and closed without producing sound as he struggled to formulate damage control that could possibly salvage both the situation and his career prospects, finding all options inadequate against the magnitude of his miscalculation. The internal crisis playing across his features provided silent satisfaction to staff members watching discreetly from service stations around the restaurant, each having experienced similar dismissive treatment from countless Richards throughout their careers without witnessing consequences. Our executive team would be delighted to review your proposal. Maya responded with professional courtesy that acknowledged the company while subtly excluding Richard from the conversation, her tone making clear that his behavior had removed him from consideration as a legitimate business contact. I have an opening this Thursday at 9, if you would like to present the partnership opportunity formally. The invitation extended clearly toward James and Vanessa, caused Richard to inhale sharply as he recognized his own exclusion, the professional isolation mirroring the social isolation he had attempted to impose on Maya earlier through his discriminatory behavior, the symmetrical justice more devastating than any direct confrontation could have been. The invisible social architecture of the restaurant reconfigured itself around the unfolding scene with the fluid precision of a living organism responding to a fundamental shift in its environment. Regular patrons who had witnessed the earlier interaction now approached with measured timing that suggested coordinated orchestration, though it was merely the natural rhythm of respect asserting itself after temporary disruption. An elderly couple who had celebrated their anniversary at Le Jardin every year since its opening stopped briefly to clasp Maya's hand with familial warmth, the gentleman leaning in to murmur something that produced a genuine smile. The state senator dining by the window excused herself from her companions to exchange brief pleasantries, her body language communicating long-standing acquaintance rather than political networking. Most telling was the approach of Sylvia Morrison, the notoriously private technology innovator, whose net worth exceeded $3 billion yet, who moved through the world with such deliberate anonymity that Richard failed to recognize her, despite her company being among his most coveted potential clients. Maya, darling, the new dessert menu is absolutely transcendent, she declared with the casual intimacy of friendship rather than customer interaction, completely ignoring Richard while kissing Maya on both cheeks. That chocolate sculpture with the gold leaf infusion must be directly from heaven itself. The procession continued with the natural momentum of truth reasserting itself after temporary concealment, each interaction further illuminating the profound misjudgment Richard had made in dismissing someone whose influence clearly extended far beyond the culinary world into social and business spheres he had spent his career attempting to penetrate. Throughout the restaurant, staff members moved with renewed purpose and subtle pride, shoulders straightening as they witnessed their employer receiving the recognition normally reserved for celebrities or political figures, the visible respect validating their own association with her establishment and philosophy. Richard shrank physically in his chair with each new approach, his earlier expansive gestures and space-claiming posture replaced with the diminished body language of someone desperately wishing to become invisible within a narrative he could no longer control. The social isolation crystallized into absolute completeness when James and Vanessa rose simultaneously to introduce themselves properly to Maya, effectively abandoning Richard at the table like unwanted baggage while enthusiastically discussing potential collaboration points between their companies. "Your staff profit-sharing model is revolutionary," Vanessa gushed with uncharacteristic animation, her normally reserved professional demeanor transformed by genuine admiration. "The case study Harvard Business Review published about your employee retention statistics completely transformed my thinking about hospitality management." James nodded eagerly, adding his own praise about the foundation Maya had established providing culinary scholarships to underprivileged youth, each compliment driving Richard further into the purgatory of irrelevance at his own business dinner. The two remaining associates exchanged glances loaded with professional calculation before also rising to join the conversation forming around Maya, their defection completing Richard's isolation with the brutal efficiency of prey animals, abandoning the weakest member when predators approach. The justice unfolding required no dramatic confrontation or raised voices, its power lying precisely in its quiet inevitability as natural consequences aligned with moral truth through the simple revelation of identity rather than artificial authority. Throughout the restaurant, other diners observed with the satisfied expressions of audience members witnessing the perfectly executed third act of a play where justice prevails not through violence, but through the elegant revelation of truth that had been present, but temporarily obscured, the collective appreciation creating an almost palpable warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold reality of Richard's self-created isolation at a table suddenly far too large for one man whose illusion of importance had shattered beyond repair. The intimate circle that had formed around Maya created a natural stage for the story she rarely shared in full, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby tables without theatrical projection as she responded to Vanessa's question about her unconventional path to success. "My grandmother raised me in South Chicago after my mother passed away when I was 7, Maya began, the simple statement holding volumes of unspoken struggle beneath its factual surface. "We lived in a 2-room apartment where the heat worked approximately 3 months of the year, and she cleaned hotel rooms for 37 years to keep food on our table." The details emerged without self-pity or performative hardship, simply the objective reality that had formed the foundation of her journey. "I worked my first kitchen job at 14 washing dishes under the table at a diner 6 blocks from our apartment, fell in love with the energy of restaurants, and knew I wanted to create spaces where food brought people together." Around her, faces reflected genuine engagement rather than the polite listening often afforded successful people's origin stories, her authenticity commanding attention more effectively than any practiced anecdote designed to impress. "After high school, I applied to 68 culinary programs, with rejection letters from 67 of them, many suggesting I lacked the natural creativity necessary for culinary arts. Interesting feedback considering they had never tasted my food." The observation carried no bitterness, despite the obvious discrimination. It represented simply factual acknowledgement of obstacles overcome. "During culinary school, I worked 3 jobs simultaneously. Morning barista shift starting at 4, afternoon administrative work at a dental office, and weekend catering gigs that often lasted until 2 in the morning, all while maintaining top grades and developing the business plan for what would eventually become my first restaurant." Jonathan Pierce captured each detail with journalistic precision, recognizing the narrative gold of a success story built on genuine merit rather than privilege or connection, his fingers moving across his phone screen with the practiced efficiency of someone translating lived experience into written record for millions of readers. "The turning point came after 23 bank rejections for my first restaurant loan," Maya continued, her eyes briefly meeting Richard's uncomfortable gaze before moving compassionately away from his evident discomfort. "I was serving coffee to a regular customer at the cafe when she overheard me practicing my loan pitch during my break. Without introduction, she requested my business plan, reviewed it over her second cappuccino, and wrote a check for $150,000 on the spot with a single condition, that when I succeeded, I would create opportunities for others facing similar barriers." The restaurant had fallen completely silent, staff pausing in their duties to absorb a story many had heard fragments of, but never in complete form from the woman who signed their paychecks and remembered their birthdays with personal notes. That woman became my first investor, mentor, and eventually godmother to my daughter. Her belief in me when every institutional door had closed completely transformed my understanding of both success and responsibility. Maya's hand unconsciously touched the pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's sole valuable possession, the gesture connecting her past to her present with tangible symbolism. The Washington Culinary Foundation has since provided full scholarships to 128 students from backgrounds similar to mine, with 86% now working professionally in the industry and 17 running their own successful establishments. The statistics required no embellishment, their simple power residing in lives transformed rather than profits generated, though her business success made the philanthropic impact possible. Throughout the restaurant, expressions reflected the collective recognition of a success story earned through legitimate merit, rather than inherited advantage or performative hustle, creating a stark contrast with Richard's earlier boasts about corporate acquisitions and strategic layoffs. The moral center of her narrative emerged not through explicit declaration, but through the values embedded within her actions: perseverance without resentment, success without forgetting its foundations, wealth used to create opportunity rather than separation from those still struggling. Jonathan Pierce completed his notes with the satisfied expression of a journalist who had found the perfect embodiment of his thesis about authentic versus performative authority, knowing the story would resonate with millions while potentially transforming perceptions about success, privilege, and responsibility in ways that abstract arguments never could. Richard Bennett rose with the stiff movements of someone navigating unfamiliar terrain, his earlier confident posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man desperate to escape scrutiny that felt increasingly like judgment with each passing moment. His fingers fumbled with his wallet, extracting his premium credit card with none of the flourish he typically employed to ensure others noticed its exclusive metal weight and limited membership status. Maya noticed his retreat with the same quiet awareness she brought to every aspect of her establishment, excusing herself from the enthusiastic conversation James and Vanessa were building about potential collaboration points between their companies. She intercepted Richard with perfect timing as he attempted to slip away unnoticed. Her approach neither confrontational nor theatrical, yet impossible to evade without obvious rudeness. "Mr. Bennett?" She addressed him directly for the first time since revealing her identity. Her voice pitched precisely to reach his ears alone rather than create public spectacle of his humiliation. Richard paused with visible reluctance, his eyes fixed on the exit doors 27 steps away that represented escape from the most professionally catastrophic dinner of his career. Maya studied him for a moment with gaze that contained no vindictiveness despite ample justification, only the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had encountered countless Richards throughout her journey and recognized the insecurity beneath the arrogance. "Success doesn't grant immunity from decency," she offered finally, the observation neither lecture nor accusation but simple truth delivered without unnecessary force. The truly powerful lift others up rather than push them down. The words contained no explicit reference to his behavior, yet addressed its essence with uncomfortable precision, offering wisdom rather than punishment, though the latter might have felt more appropriate to those who had witnessed his earlier cruelty. Richard opened his mouth as though to respond before closing it again, when no adequate reply presented itself, the simple moral clarity of her statement leaving no room for corporate doublespeak or strategic reframing. He nodded once, a gesture containing neither commitment nor genuine acknowledgement but mere recognition that words had been spoken, before continuing his solitary exit through doors held open by staff members whose perfect professionalism revealed nothing of their private satisfaction at witnessing rare accountability for behavior they encountered daily without recourse. Behind him, his abandoned associates seamlessly incorporated themselves into the growing circle around Maya. Business cards, exchanging hands with the enthusiastic energy of people recognizing valuable connection beyond the original dinner's intended purpose. Maya watched Richard's departure with neither triumph nor resentment before turning with genuine warmth toward her remaining guests, her attention shifting completely from the confrontation to the opportunities it had unexpectedly created. With subtle gestures nearly invisible to casual observation, she signaled to her staff that she would resume her original role, disappearing briefly to re-emerge minutes later in her server uniform with the fluid transition of someone completely comfortable in either identity. The restaurant absorbed this transformation with collective understanding, regular patrons smiling with appreciation, while newcomers leaned toward companions for whispered explanations about the owner who still served tables because she believed leadership required remembering how it felt to serve rather than be served. Jonathan Pierce observed the final scene with the satisfied expression of a writer who recognized perfect narrative resolution without artificial construction, watching as Maya personally delivered dessert to an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary with the same attentive care she would later bring to contract negotiations for multi-million-dollar deals. Throughout the restaurant, recognition spread in ripples as patrons understood they had witnessed something rare and valuable. Not merely comeuppance for entitled behavior, but the revelation that true dignity resided in character rather than position, in lifting others rather than elevating oneself through their diminishment. The appreciation manifested not in theatrical standing ovation but in something more meaningful. The subtle straightening of service staff postures throughout the room, the respectful nods from business executives who recognized authentic leadership, the spontaneous small gestures of additional generosity on credit card receipts as patrons completed their evenings. As Maya moved between tables with the same graceful efficiency she had demonstrated before the confrontation, her existence itself became the most powerful possible statement, neither defined by poverty overcome nor success achieved, but by the consistent character that had remained her true north through both circumstances, creating in her wake a momentary glimpse of the world as it could be if we recognized the humanity in every person regardless of the uniform they wore or position they held.